Well, Dave, thank you for sharing those images with us. And for those of you that might not have seen the message when you entered the room, we want to start with that slideshow presentation of some of the photos that Dave has captured along the trail. We're going to see some more of those at the end. But Dave, you and I, we were commenting before we added guests to the meeting on a gloomy day like today and maybe a gloomy year. Seeing some of those photos, the sunshine, the outdoors, the sense of open space and freedom, I think we're all looking forward to some more of that in our lives coming up soon. And we're inviting you back today. Almost a year ago, it was April 2nd, I think. We hosted the inaugural Zoomtime Knowledge session, and you were our featured guest presenter. Now, almost a year later, we've invited you back for part 2 of hiking the Appalachian Trail in retirement. And I think it's timely. You know, it's a point in time where almost to April, I think that's when you return to the trail. And within LLI, I should let everyone know that we're preparing a return to in-person activities soon as well, as we're getting more and more good reports about more people being fully vaccinated. We're working on resuming our hiking group and getting them back on the trail, and hopefully we have an announcement for you about those details within the coming weeks. But I want to welcome everyone and provide an introduction to Dave, just in case you don't have the pleasure of knowing Dave or you haven't met him and outside of LLI or these virtual programs. But Dave is a professor emeritus of mathematics and statistics here at James Madison University. In addition to 3 decades of mathematics teaching, Dave has a decade of aerospace-related research experience at NASA's Langley Research Center. He's also author of Reason and Wonder. That's the outgrowth of an award-winning JMU honors seminar that explores the nexus of science and spirituality. And Dave next week is going to be a featured presenter as part of a course that we're offering on mystics through the ages. Since his retirement in 2012, Dave has taught or team taught 10 lifelong learning courses. And Dave, even today, I know we keep you busy in your retirement. You've got other interests like hiking the Appalachian Trail, but I just want to, before we get started, say thank you for everything you're doing and have done for LLI, being such a good friend of the university and program. And I just appreciate the time and preparation that I know you've put into this and every offering that you've provided, especially since we've been in this online space. I really appreciate your friendship and the work that you do, and I look forward to learning with you today here as part of Zoomtime Knowledge. Those of you who do not know what Zoomtime Knowledge is, it might be the first time you're joining us. It's a free public education series hosted by the JMU Lifelong Learning Institute, and we try to have these events at least every other week, free and open to the public, just a way to keep us connected online here during the pandemic, and we hope we're past that soon and again back outdoors, maybe along with Dave on one of these trails. But David, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. We'll be in the background, me and Sue, if you need anything, but welcome. We're here to support you.
Thanks a bunch, Rodney. I appreciate all that you and Sue do as well to keep us informed and engaged even during a pandemic. And I'd like to welcome everyone to part 2 of Never Too Late for a Trail Name, section hiking the Appalachian Trail of the Virginias in retirement. As Rodney mentioned, I gave the inaugural Zoomtime presentation just about a year ago. That was part 1 of this experience on the Appalachian Trail. And the inaugural presentation went pretty well, but I focused primarily on getting the technology right, and I wound up having about twice as much material as would fit in the hour's time. So think of today as eating leftovers that are nearly a year old. And with that introduction, I am going to try to share screen here. And I have to use the advanced setting because I only want to share a portion of screen, and great, everything came up as it should. Now, the Appalachian Trail, conceived in 1921 and completed in 1937, is the longest continuous footpath, exclusively a footpath, on Earth. It stretches 2,200 miles from its southern terminus on Springer Mountain in Georgia to its northern terminus on Mount Katahdin in Maine, traversing 14 states in all. Now, for part one, I focused primarily on the history and inspiration of the trail. Part one was recorded, and hopefully Rodney can send around a link later, or perhaps has already done so if you want to revisit part one or if you missed it. What I'd like to focus on today is a little bit different. Of course, there'll be some overlap, but what I'd like to provide today is some personal background by way of motivation, what got me out there to begin with, to talk about some of my favorite places on the trail, to talk also about some of my favorite experiences on the trail, and finally, to show you some trail gear, and it was recommended that I do so from at the last talk. And hopefully we will end with another brief slideshow of about 3 to 4 minutes before Q&A. Now, the Appalachian Trail is affectionately known as the AT. Its path through Virginia and West Virginia is shown here in red. Somewhat surprisingly, Virginia's 550 miles comprise fully 1/4 of the trail's entire length. There are only a few miles of trail in West Virginia, but the sister states share about 40 miles of trail along their boundaries in Southwest Virginia and Northern Virginia. Now, I grew up in Bluefield, if you can see the cursor, at the southern tip of West Virginia, no more than about 15 miles as the crow flies from the AT. The AT always loomed large in my aspirations. In college and during my 20s, I completed a few section hikes, each of about 20 miles. My brother Willie, who is considerably younger, was a willing accomplice in those early days. Then there was a long hiking dry spell, during which I focused primarily on higher education and career. But then, in the summer of 1988, having recently married and taken my first academic position at VCU, I was unexpectedly beset by an urge to solo trek, which I'd never done before, perhaps as an antidote to the stress of being a new faculty member. Dad had just retired, so I asked him to drop me in Damascus, Virginia, a famous trail town, and to pick me up a few days later. And so, at the age of 40, I strapped on an enormous JanSport external frame backpack, filled it with 54 pounds of gear and sustenance, and hiked north from Damascus, bound for the high country of Mount Rogers and Grayson Highlands State Park. After a schlep of 9 miles, mostly uphill, I collapsed and camped right beside the trail, too exhausted to find a better spot. Each day thereafter, I grew stronger. And by day 4, lugging a pack for 15 miles seemed the most natural thing in the world. And taking it off at the end of the day occasioned the euphoria of feeling weightless. Dad picked me up in the afternoon of the 5th day, and we spent a sweet night with Grandma at the family cabin, my halfway house back to civilization. I'd knocked off 55 miles and had a glorious adventure. Career and family intervened, and few such opportunities presented themselves until I semi-retired at 64. Hiking the full AT remained on the bucket list, but was I over the hill? Most likely. Certainly my JanSport days were over. The external frame beast in its arcade gear gave way to an internal frame North Face, pack, a lightweight down sleeping bag, and a 3-pound MSR tent. And much as I loved that faithful brass Swedish stove, it went to pasture, replaced by a 1.7-ounce titanium contraption atop a 5-ounce propane canister. But more about the gear later. And so, in September 2013, the second summer of my retirement, my wife dropped me late one morning in historic Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, which is the rough midpoint of the AT, and I naively headed south and uphill from the Shenandoah River, this time with 40 pounds of gear, including 7 days of food. I'd hoped to make 100 miles in a week and to convince myself that the 25 intervening years since my first solo trek had not robbed me of much stamina. Oh, was I wrong. The route snaked over the infamous boulder-strewn roller coaster that fatigues even veteran hikers, past the delicious Bears Den Youth Hostel, where $30 gets you a bed, a shower, a washer, a pizza, and a pint of Ben and Jerry's. And then to the threshold of graceful Sky Meadows State Park. I showered at Bears Den, but I left immediately, cognizant that should I remain longer, I'd succumb to the sirens of comfort. On the morning of day 5, with just 34 miles under my belt and a painful blister at the end of a toe, I awakened to terrifying numbness along my right arm. Fearing heart attack, I popped a baby aspirin, always a companion, and called my wife to rescue me. In the 2 hours it took Suzanne to arrive, an alternative diagnosis surfaced. It wasn't a heart attack, but a pinched nerve from too heavy reliance on my hiking pole while traversing the roller coaster. But it was time to throw in the towel. 3 weeks elapsed before full feeling returned in that arm. The next summer, expectations trimmed, I tried again, anticipating a 3-day inaugural trek. 2 buddies dropped me near Front Royal and joined me for a few miles as I hiked into Shenandoah National Park. 8 miles and 2,000 feet in elevation later, now alone, I set up camp on a rocky trail, moments ahead of a thunderstorm. On day 2, I planned another 8 to 10 miles, but unwisely extended to 12, lured by visions of a shower at Matthews Arm Campground. Exhausted and eager to call it a day, I raced downhill to the campground, pounding all the way. Alas, there was no shower, only a comfort station. Dejected, I rested at a picnic table. 10 minutes later, I could barely walk. After a near sleepless night, I hobbled to the Skyline Drive to meet my long-suffering wife. This time, the injury was severe. I'd mangled the meniscus in my left knee. For 2 months, I limped in pain, then spent another 2 recovering from arthroscopic surgery. It seemed my backpacking days were at an end. An orthopedist said, "No more. Take to biking instead." Fortunately, my general practitioner offered a second opinion, but with provisos. So during the spring of recovery following surgery, I sought a compromise with myself. If I were to limit the number of days per trek to 3, limit my pack weight to 30 pounds, and my daily distance to 8 miles, could I possibly keep trekking long enough to complete Virginia's AT? And with distance expectations trimmed, might there be more occasions to stop and smell the wildflowers along the way? Amazingly, the plan worked. The third summer, I completed 5 short section hikes, each of about 20 miles, finishing the AT through Shenandoah National Park. By the end of a section, the troublesome knee was sore and stiff, but it recovered after a few days of rest and acupuncturist recommended exercises. Ibuprofen, I admit, before hiking also helped tamp down swelling. And sure enough, a turtle's pace had advantages. The experience became richer. By the end of the fourth summer, 2016, having turned 68, I completed all sections between the Shenandoah and James rivers. Here's the footbridge over the James. By September 2017, a year later, I completed all trail from Harpers Ferry to the Eastern Continental Divide near Catawba, which is south of Roanoke. In September 2018, I filled in a difficult section on Pearis Mountain, south of Pearisburg, to complete all trail from Harpers Ferry to the small town of Bastion in Bland County. This left one more season, Lord willing and the creek don't rise, as we say in West Virginia, to complete the section, to connect with the section I'd hiked 30 years ago, north of Damascus. Finally, in August of 2019, age 71, I finished the stretch of trail I'd saved for last, a difficult 27-mile section on Garden Mountain, which skirts Burke's Garden in Tazewell County. Now this section serendipitously wound up being my very favorite. I'll tell you why later. To summarize, it took me 8 seasons of section hiking, 1 to 5 sections per season, to complete the Appalachian Trail of the Virginias, 550 miles, and 1/4 of the entire trail. Now, one might think that the AT would become boring. Doesn't it all look alike? No, not at all. I'm constantly astounded at the diversity of terrain, rock formations, ground cover, weather, wildflowers, you name it. I once encountered a fellow who'd completed the Triple Crown of trails in the US, the AT, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail. I inquired as to his favorite, and without hesitation, he said the AT because of its variety. And indeed, he was hiking it a second time. So I want to show you now just a few of the infinitely many beautiful spots that stand out in my memory. Virginia's topography reaches its highest elevation at Mount Rogers, 5,729 feet above sea level. The summit is forested with no view, but the high meadows near Mount Rogers are so spectacular that the area has been designated a national recreation area. One of the few alpine ecosystems in the eastern US, the region incorporates several wildernesses as well as Grayson Highlands State Park. The vistas from the high balds are exquisite. Mount Rogers Recreation Area is one of my favorite places on this earth. Another favorite place is Kelly Knob, on a short side trail off the AT, what's known as a Blue Blaze Trail. Kelly Knob sits in a remote area near Mountain Lake Wilderness. I wound up camping there for a night. I arrived just as the sun was peeking through after a rainstorm. The place seemed magical, with impressive rock formations, majestic views, trees that seem to be listening, and wild azaleas in flame orange interspersed among the blooming mountain laurel. Now, my friends, the AT is by and large a forest trail. Direct sunlight seldom penetrates the dense hardwood canopy. Meadows, then, are rare treats. One breaks out of the enveloping gloom into unexpected brilliance, and the contrast shocks the senses. Brooding yields to euphoria. Another favorite place is Coal Mountain, which features a high meadow. The area lies deep in the George Washington National Forest, north of US 60 and east of the Blue Ridge Parkway. 4 times now, I have traveled in this backcountry, twice on day hikes with friends and twice while backpacking, once alone. Rain socked in both backpacking trips, so I've yet to see the views from the meadows that everyone raves about. But near Coal Mountain are 2 circuit hikes that form a figure 8. They connect at remote Hog Camp Gap in Amherst County. The Coal Mountain Loop and the Mount Pleasant Loop. Mount Pleasant features twin peaks, each with a commanding view. The west-facing peak offers this unobstructed southwestward view of undulating mountains, including Coal Mountain. It's hard to believe that in the eastern US in the 21st century, there are still vistas like this, with no sign of human presence for miles. Now, one of the things that keeps AT hikers going is magic. Trail magic comes in 3 varieties. Unexpected kindness encountered along the way, an unexpected caloric treat, or an unexpected visual treat. The Lindamood Schoolhouse affords all 3 kinds of magic. Now, I'd been primed for the experience by a northbound hiker who told me to stay alert for magic, but he was vague on the details so as not to mar the spontaneity. Built in 1894, this one-room schoolhouse sits right alongside the AT, which you can see in the foreground, near Grosse Close, Virginia, where the AT crosses Interstate 81. The schoolhouse ceased operation in 1937, but is preserved pretty much as it existed on the last day used, with wooden 2-seater desks, a pot-bellied stove, and on the wall, pictures of George Washington and Abe Lincoln, and an American flag with 2 few stars. Hikers are invited to drop their packs, come in and sit a spell. The only modern conveniences are 3 plastic coolers along the back wall, filled with sodas, water, and snacks. They're all free for the taking, thanks to trail angels from a nearby Methodist church. Now, before we talk about trail gear, I'd like to share 2 of my favorite trail experiences. One in the company of others, and the other solo, but still communal in a completely unexpected way. Pearis Mountain near Pearisburg, Virginia, was destined to be a difficult section because of its length and a brutal climb up the steep face of the mountain if southbound. A trail shuttle driver convinced me to attempt Pearis Mountain south to north instead, which offered a much more gradual climb. He also told me that I had to visit Woods Hole Hostel. Now, hostels abound along the trail, but I generally figure these are for the young crowd and I avoid them. However, I had heard so much about Woods Hole that I knew I had to stop there, even though it's a steep half mile off the trail. Woods Hole did not disappoint. It's a unique place, a bit of a Shangri La with a fascinating history. In 1939, Roy and Tilly Wood from Roswell, Georgia, discovered a rustic chestnut log cabin in Sugar Run Valley and holed up for a year while Roy completed a master's thesis on elk populations. Over time, Roy and Tilly bought the cabin, renting it for 40 years to hunters. 1981, Roy retired from the Department of the Interior, and for the next 5 years, he and Tilly lovingly restored Woods Hole, often with a passel of grandkids in tow. In 1986, having added a log bunkhouse, they opened Woods Hole as a hostel. A year later, Roy died of heart failure. Tilly continued to run Woods Hole for 21 years until she passed of cancer in 2007. And what was her dying concern? Who would continue the hostel? Enter Neville, one of Roy and Tilly's granddaughters. Neville was a natural. After all, she'd visited her grandparents there since the age of 4. In 2009, she and her husband, Michael, moved from Georgia to continue the family's hosteling tradition. The pair had met at Woods Hole in 2005 when Michael stopped there while through hiking the entire trail. What they've since built together is remarkable. Woods Hole is an organic farm as well as a hostel. The main house now has 2 bed and breakfast rooms. Neville and Michael are both artsy, and artistic flourishes adorn every corner. The bunkhouse is small but charming. The new bathhouse, it's water heated by a wood furnace, is simultaneously functional, rustic, and tastefully decorated with knickknacks and remnants of tile. In the summer of 2018, Woods Hole had just installed 2 screened safari tents on raised platforms. I rented one for a night of glamping, that's glamour camping, during the challenging Pearis mountain section hike. I had a queen-size bed and a lovely view of Sugar Run Valley. A few extra bucks at Woods Hole buys a home-cooked organic dinner. Hikers are expected to help in the kitchen or around the farm, which in this hiker's estimation only adds to the camaraderie and one's appreciation of the labor of love that is Woods Hole. I departed Woods Hole fully refreshed, squeaky clean, and nourished by both the food and the companionship. Now, friends, I'd like to share my very favorite experience. I'd saved for last a 27-mile section on Garden Mountain, which, which bounds Burke's Garden in rural Tazewell County, Virginia. Now, Burke's Garden is geologically fascinating. It's a high oval-shaped valley, 4 miles in width by 8 miles in length. A single paved road leads into the garden from a breach in the western wall, and 2 dirt roads lead in from the east. From the air, the garden looks like a meteor crater or even an ancient volcanic caldera, but it's neither. Geologists tell us it's a gigantic sinkhole. The valley, both beautiful and fertile, has been farmed for generations. Now, I'd saved this section for last because it presented a number of challenges. Length, a major climb, and worst of all, a 10-mile section with no reliable water. With my limitations, I couldn't figure out how to do it without pushing my envelope beyond reason. I found just one possibility for conquering the section: to camp the first night 1/2 mile off the trail at a place called Davis Farm Campsite, which was reported to have an unreliable, intermittent water source. Damn the torpedoes. I decided to give it a try. The night prior to embarking, I stayed at Bear Garden Hiker Hostel near Ceres, Virginia, and talked proprietor Bob Lingham into ferrying me to the trailhead at 7 in the morning. This so I could get the climbing out of the way before August heat kicked in. Bob faithfully dropped me at 7:30 at this sturdy bridge at the entrance to Hunting Camp Creek Wilderness in the Jefferson National Forest. 4.5 miles later, mostly on fire road, I dropped into a rhododendron forested ravine and crossed this bridge near Jenkins Shelter. This being the last reliable water for the next 10 miles, I filled up all 3.5 liters, and around 10 a.m. began a 1,600-foot climb in 3 miles. All during the climb, I obsessed about plans B and C in the event that the Davis Farm campsite was dry, and neither alternative scenario was pretty. At about 1:30 in the afternoon, the moment of reckoning arrived. High on the ridge of Garden Mountain, I stood at the juncture of the half-mile side trail down to the campsite. On the primitive sign to the site, someone had written ominously with magic marker, "Not worth it." To make matters worse, the side trail cut through waist-high, stinging nettles. By the time I got to the campsite, my bare legs were afire. The postage stamp sized campsite was the only level spot on this entire steep, nettle strewn hillside. It was actually a god-forsaken grassy rectangle. That was the campsite, resting in the foundational footprint of an old homestead. The one amenity was a narrow view through the trees of the northern end of Burke's garden. Dropping my backpack, I picked up water bottles and struck off through the nettles in search of the water that might or might not be there. In a tiny little ravine, there was a glassy sheen. Ah, water! Relief overwhelmed me until I realized I had no way to collect it. Then panic nearly set in. Fortunately, I recalled some trail engineering I'd encountered on previous sections. I took a broad leaf from a tree, anchored it in the water flow, and propped up the tip to make a tiny spigot. I managed to fill 2 water bottles, but it took 10 minutes for each. Back at the campsite, I had a nap and dinner, all the while enjoying the moods of the garden as witnessed through the narrow window from the campsite. All was well until I went after dinner to refill with water. The earlier trickle had slowed to droplets. It took half an hour to collect half a liter. With careful conservation, I had enough water for breakfast and an additional 1.5 liters for the 6 miles to the next source, assuming it was reliable. Enough, but just barely. I left early the next morning, cresting the mountain again at 8 a.m. And from there, it was almost 6 miles along the ridge to Walker Gap, which promised two piped springs, each half a mile apart. Surely at least one would be functioning. Within a mile, I came to one of the fire roads that lead down into Burke's garden. And there, on a flat rock beside the trail, were these 5 unopened cans of Pepsi, a random act of kindness from a trail angel. I downed one and almost cried with relief. I was going to be okay. Hallelujah. My plan was to camp atop 4,400-foot Chestnut Knob, about 1.5 miles beyond the springs, which were still 5 miles away. Because Chestnut Knob was also waterless, I hatched a plan while walking the ridge. I'd stop at the springs, spend the afternoon, have an early dinner there, and make the 900-foot ascent to Chestnut Knob after dinner. That way, I'd need carry only enough water for breakfast. The plan was inspired. I arrived at the first spring around noon. It was a rare August day, about 75 degrees at the 3,500-foot elevation. Uncharacteristically, the air was crisp and clear. The sunshine brilliant. It was more like fall and summer. I filled up with water, napped, had dinner, and napped again before setting out at about 5, completely refreshed. At 6:30, I came out of the woods after the climb into a clearing in which resided an unusual trail shelter. A rare enclosed shelter, Chestnut Knob was originally a fire warden's cabin adjacent to a fire tower. The tower's gone, but the foundations remain. At the edges of the clearing were thickets of thistles and wildflowers, buzzing with bees and radiant with butterflies. Alone at Chestnut Knob, I elected not to stay in the shelter, but to camp at the edge of the clearing with this expansive view of Burke's garden. I set up my tent without the rainfly so I could peer through my porch screen at this idyllic scene below. Now, you see, since I was a wee tyke, Burke's garden has held me in its thrall. Among my first memories are mesmerizing stories of the Burke's garden varmint. Luscious and verdant, the garden was once ideal for raising sheep. That is, until something started killing the gentle creatures by ripping their throats. That mystery infused and infected the imagination of a 4-year-old. What might that varmint be? Adding to the aura of the garden is its unusual geology, already mentioned. And then, too, my ancestry traces to the garden. When Dad retired, he bought a computer and took up genealogy as a hobby. Near the end of his life, he made us 3 kids swear we'd not let his genealogical records be lost. I found it easier to reconstruct Dad's research than to resurrect it from his archaic software. Still, this is the relevant part of what I learned. Both of Dad's grandmothers, Roxy Lena Neal and Barbara Adeline Hager, were born, you guessed it, in Burke's garden. Now, just the day before, I'd camped at the north end of the garden, at the Davis Farm campsite. Not lost on me, my paternal grandmother was Sheila Alice Davis. The family name Davis is common in Burke's garden, and Grandma's mother, Barbara Adeline Hager, who married William Drury Davis, was born there. So just possibly, some of my ancestors had lived right where I'd camped the night before. I couldn't have planned a more fitting end to my odyssey than the evening I spent on Chestnut Knob. What began unwittingly more than 30 years ago when Dad dropped me in Damascus continued in earnest 8 years ago when Suzanne dropped me in Harpers Ferry. 24 section hikes between these bookends, and I'd all but accomplished a goal that seemed oftentimes a foolish dream. Solo hiking can be anxiety provoking. There are so many ways to get into real trouble. But at the moment when this photo was taken, looking down onto Burke's garden, where Neils and Hagers and Davises once lived, my ancestors, and some still do, hearing the bees buzz, feeling a slight breeze, I was perfectly content. There was no place in the wide world I would rather have been in the moment that this photograph was made than where I was, high on the Appalachian Trail. Burke's garden held one more surprise. The next day, my next to last on this odyssey, began with this sunrise and a heart full of gratitude. Now, my friends, I'd like to take you on a very whirlwind tour of my gear. One of you requested that I do that. And a backpacker is a little bit like a turtle carrying house and home on his or her back. Now I have to reposition here. I am wearing, oh, I need to get out of share screen, excuse me. Okay, that should take us back. Okay.
And Dave, everything's fine on our end. We're just seeing your camera feed right now.
Okay, great. So hopefully you see me in my hiking garb. I'm wearing what I normally wear on the Appalachian Trail, except for my boots because I'm actually in the family room and I didn't want to have these boots in the carpet. Now footwear varies dramatically with the preferences of the hiker. I'm old fashioned. I like heavy duty boots. They give me a lot of ankle support and a lot of protection for toes. The downside is they're really heavy, and lifting these clodhoppers over a long day takes up a lot of energy. Some hikers hike in lightweight hiking boots. The real fast through hikers, ultralight hikers actually wear tennis shoes, and sometimes wearing out several pairs during their hikes. And I've seen people hiking in Crocs. And believe it or not, there's a book out by two sisters about hiking the Appalachian Trail barefoot. And I think the title of the book might be The Barefoot Sisters. Most Appalachian Trail hikers use two hiking poles, so they're four-footed. For some reason, I like having a hand-free, so I use only one hiking pole. Orthopedists tell us that hiking poles reduce the stress on the knees by about 30%. So it's really helpful. Now, this is what I normally wear. My clothes are sprayed with permethrin, which is a natural insecticide. It protects against ticks and chiggers, and probably the greatest hazard on the Appalachian Trail is Lyme disease. And if without this protection, almost everybody would wind up with Lyme disease. Now, I tend to walk in a long sleeve shirt to protect my arms from sun, and but short pants. This is my Appalachian Trail shirt, which has a trailblaze on it, so I'm never lost. I splurged on these shorts, and I like them because they don't require a belt. They have a cinch. They're lightweight, they're stretchy, they dry out quickly. Uh, but mainly the reason I like them is because they have lots of pockets. So I'm going to take you quickly through my pockets. This is my wallet. It's a Ziploc with a $20 bill, a credit card, and my driver's license in it so I can get back home. And let's see, in this pocket, I have a bandana, which serves all kinds of purposes. It can be seen in emergency situations. It can be protect one's head from sun, a little warmth around the neck, but mainly I use it for a hot pad holder or for a dish rag, or believe it or not, for a towel. You can squeeze it out a few times and dry off with it. Now in this pocket, I have a trusty lighter, a big lighter. And believe it or not, this is a pocket knife. I use this to fend off bears. That's a joke, of course. And in this pocket, some medication, aspirin, and also Benadryl in case I would have some kind of allergic reaction. But the most important pocket, the one that gets used the most, is this one. It's a zip pocket, and it's perfect for my phone. Now, I didn't have a smartphone for the first few years on the trail, but I wanted to take photographs so I could remember these experiences. And so I got a smartphone for that reason, and I'm in awe of the quality of pictures that these phones can take. But the phone has a lot of other advantages as well. I can call or even send an SOS if I get into trouble. And then there's this amazing app that you can get for hiking the Appalachian Trail. It's called Gut Hook. I have no idea where that name came from, but it's extraordinary. It shows the trail in relief, shows elevations. It incorporates GPS so you can see your location exactly on the trail. And a few times it's helped me find my way back to the trail if I lost a trail mark. It also shows water sources, campgrounds, campsites, vistas, road crossings, towns, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really, really useful for planning and for hiking on the trail. And then the other thing, I don't listen to music when I hike like a lot of the younger people do, but I find that podcasts and music help me when I'm trying to kind of wind down and get to sleep at night. So this little pocket gets used a lot. Now I'm going to reposition here and take you through my backpack. So let's see, I think I need to position slightly better. Now this is a North Face backpack. It's internal frame, unlike my old one. It's very rugged. It's not particularly light, which is one fault that it has, but it's very comfortable and it's simple, and I prefer simplicity. It's basically just a long tube with an entryway at the top and the bottom. Now on the outside of the pack, I will keep 2 water bottles, each of a liter. And these are just plastic seltzer water bottles, which are incredibly light. And I don't have to worry if I lose one of them because they don't cost anything. Also on the outside of the pack is my rain gear. In the old days, I used to use a poncho, but I've learned that ponchos are pretty much worthless in a driving rain. On the other, it really pays to invest in high quality Gore-Tex rain gear. And this rain shell will keep you dry all day long. And I found out the hard way, or if I found out through experience, that's true. Now, a backpacker is hiking in the mountains, and mountains are weather makers, so the weather can turn on a dime, and one needs to be prepared to change clothes quickly. So at the top of my pack is a little odds and ends section, and in here I have not a mess kit, that's a first aid kit. Soap suds, these are biodegradable suds that backpackers use. They can be used for a mess kit or for personal hygiene. And here, a 5-ounce propane canister for cooking. Also is a little pouch that I put really important things in. Most important thing is these important papers. And a headlamp, which is better than a flashlight because one can read in one tent at night, or you can, if you're walking around at night, you can point your head in the right direction of your feet. Some people even hike at night with these. I don't do that. And then I have some personal items, and here I have a little notebook for journaling, a pen, of course, a recharger for my phone, and normally I would have earphones in here so I can listen to things. So we'll now get into the main part of the pack, and at the very top I keep my mess kit. Now this is very rugged, not terribly light because it's stainless steel, but it's very, very useful. Now I keep it at the top because I often put my lunch snacks in the mess kit so I can get to them easily. Here, for example, I have cranberry health mix, which is fruit and nuts mix. And here is Whiskey Valley jerky from the farmer's market in Dayton, Virginia. It's really good stuff. Now, inside the mess kit is a spork. A spork is a spoon and a fork together, so it's only one utensil. A cup that doubles as a drinking cup and as a measuring cup. And believe it or not, this little gizmo, which is my stove, it weighs 1.7 ounces, and it screws on top of this propane canister here. It has little wings that come out for so you can balance the pot on it. And these two things together will keep me cooking for about 3 days. A larger propane canister for about 5. Now, the one thing you don't see is a plate. I don't need a plate. I use the lid of the pot for a plate if I need one. Now, something that's really important is water for purification. And in the old days, one used to use halogens, that is iodine or chlorine tablets, halazone tablets. They made the water taste awful, and I'm not sure they were that good for you. Nowadays, the favorite for most Appalachian trailers is the Sawyer filter. This is I think, a 10th micron filter that filters out bacteria and even viruses, I believe. It's very simple. You can buy it for $30 at Walmart. It consists of two parts: a plastic bag that you fill up with untreated water. Then you screw the bag onto the filter, or the filter onto the bag, squeeze the untreated water through the filter, and out comes the treated water. The only problem with these is that if you're treating water with silt in it, they will clog up, but they can be back flushed. Now, an amazing device that my wife found for me is the SteriPen. The SteriPen is an ultraviolet light, and if the water is clear, then one can place the SteriPen in the water bottle, push the button, the light comes on, and in 90 seconds, you've sterilized a liter of water. In 45 seconds, a half a liter. So sometimes I use one or the other. If the water is really questionable, like coming out of a creek near a cow pasture, as I will use both as a last resort. Now, every hiker needs some comforts. This is an air mattress that is very comfortable and very lightweight. It weighs just about I think it's 12 ounces. I won't blow it up for you. Trust me on that. And this is a stuff sack that is both waterproof and nearly airproof, the way it seals up. And in this, I keep both my sleeping bag and my clothes. I have a lightweight down sleeping bag, and of course, down has no warmth if it's wet. So it's very important to keep it dry. So in here, I have this is a little vest that packs up into a pocket, and it's down also, and it doubles as a pillow when I camp. I have here a lightweight fleece, long sleeve fleece, and here I have some old sweatpants. A trick I learned a long time ago is to sleep in sweatpants, because I hate the feeling of sticky, dirty legs against a nylon sleeping bag. And then I have an extra shirt and socks and some undies in there. Now, the last thing to show you of the gear, except for the tent, is my food stuff. This is a Bear Vault. A Bear Vault is a heavy-duty plastic canister that's impervious to bears. It's a good place to keep food. You can also sit on it if you can't find a rock or a log. It's impervious to bears, which is good, but if your hands are cold, it's nearly impervious to human beings as well. But I've managed to loosen the lid in advance, so I don't have to struggle too much. The top of this, one would keep a garbage bag that is a Ziploc. You don't want smells to get out into the wilderness because it attracts all kinds of creatures. And normally this would hold about 3 days worth of food. I've only put 1 day's worth of food in here for demonstration purposes. And here is it's a toothpaste and a toothbrush. You might not think that's food to human beings, but it is to some critters. So this is a good place to keep it. I'll show you my breakfast, lunch, and dinner real quickly. Typical breakfast is hot chocolate, a cereal bar, instant grits, instant oatmeal, and tea. I love tea all times of day, and I find it a good pick-me-up. I usually have a couple of cups of tea in the morning to rehydrate. For lunch, beef jerky, peanuts, granola, and dried fruit. Now, for dinner, I've put 2 dinners in here. One is this Indian mushroom masala, um, which is heavy because it's liquidy. So I would eat that, say, on the first night, and I would only carry one of these. Eat the heavy stuff first. Most dinners, I have these Knorr dishes. They're dehydrated, but you can buy them in the grocery store. This is teriyaki noodles, and then I spice it up with Thai chili style tuna. And then in addition to all that, a lot of chocolate. Chocolate's a good pick-me-up or a good dessert any time of the day. An extra lighter in case I lose the one that's in my pocket, and salt and pepper. Now, I've shown you the bear vault, but actually I try not to take this because the empty weight is 2 pounds, and that, believe it or not, is a lot of weight to carry needlessly. So I would only carry this when I absolutely have to, when there might be a nuisance bear in the area. The other thing I wanted to tell you that you can buy all kinds of fancy freeze-dried food, but everything I've shown you is off the shelf at a grocery store. Finally, I didn't show you the tent. The tent would have been packed at the bottom of my pack, but I've got it set up here in the family room. It's a one-person tent. The base of it is about 2 feet by 7 feet. Inside is my 2-pound down sleeping bag. The tent itself weighs about 3 pounds and sets up in 5 to 10 minutes. It's a really good tent, and it weighs about 3 pounds, and it feels like home to me when I'm on the trail. Oh, I think that was a whirlwind tour, and I think I will take another 3 minutes, if it's okay, Rodney, and show you that last video. Is that okay?
Absolutely, Dave. We have time, so feel free to get that started. And if you need any help, let me know.
Okay, so here goes. This is a different series of photographs. And I need to share a screen here. But fortunately, this time I can just share the whole thing. And I believe we're ready to roll. Okay, folks. Thanks for listening.
Dave, thank you. I'd said at the beginning, I appreciated all your preparation, and everyone connected now can see what I was talking about. All packed up with nowhere to go. You've set up a tent. You've packed your bag, and now after the presentation, you get to put it all away. So there's
Well, I'm going to let you clean up, Rodney.
yeah. So I appreciate all of that in addition to preparing for your presentation. As we transition into Q&A, there are a few questions in the chat window, and then I'm going to restore microphone access to everyone. The first one, and I'll just read these to you. The first slideshow, we saw photos of Pepsi cans, and they said, "What's with all of those cans, Dave?"
Well, as I mentioned in my favorite experience, or I mentioned that one of the things that keeps hikers going despite all the obstacles is magic. And trail magic comes in lots of varieties, but it's often provided by trail angels. And these are volunteers who just do random acts of kindness just because it makes them feel good. And I've been beneficiary on a couple of occasions of those random acts of kindness, one of which was the stashing of 5 cans of Pepsi on a section of trail, a 10-mile section of trail that had no water. And it was where our fire road crossed the AT. It was in the middle of nowhere. But I went from thinking I would be okay that day to realizing that I really would be okay, thanks to their kindness. So,
The next question, Dave, is do you have any other adventures planned for the Appalachian Trail beyond the Virginias?
the answer to that is yes and no. I really thought I was going to hang it up completely because my knees are not in very good shape, and I'm probably facing surgery in the next few years at most. However, I really missed it, and so last summer, I decided I would try to do Maryland, which is just 40 miles trail, and but I violated my own rules to keep the sections to about 20 to 25 miles. And I got into a little bit of trouble, so I only finished half of Maryland. So I do intend to try to finish Maryland soon in the next couple of weeks if the weather permits, with my wife's blessing, because Suzanne has had to rescue me at least 3 times, if not 4. But after that, as much as I hate to, I think I'm going to give it up. However, I'm trying to shift to rails to trails biking. And last October, in lieu of an Appalachian Trail trip, I rode on the New River Trail, which is 57-mile rails to trails biking in Southwest Virginia from Galax to Pulaski, and that was just wonderful. And it's probably safer than backpacking at the age I am now. So I think I'm going to be making a gradual shift in that direction.
Dave, there's another question. We saw your photographs, so we know that you maybe kept like a photo journal, if you want to call it that. But we hear in your presentation, and those of us who know you know that you're an excellent writer too. So, question here: did you journal your experiences while on the trail?
Well, I hope we have time for a long answer to that. At first, I didn't have any way to take photographs for the first at least 3 summers. So I got the iPhone to take photographs just for my own record. I always took a little teeny notebook and I would scribble 3 or 4 impressions over the day at the end of the day. And often I was so tired at night that they're really just scribblings, hardly writing. But when I did the Burke's Garden, when I got near the end of this odyssey, I started feeling really nostalgic. And so I put together a photographic essay, pretty much what you guys saw, of the photographs I'd taken. In fact, Suzanne and I went back to some of the places I'd missed with the camera to fill in some of the photographs. And then I thought, well, why don't I write down some reflections as well? That will cement the experience even more in my memory. And so I went back to those little notes that I'd taken, and they were enough to jog memory. And so I wrote up like 12 little 12 little essays, each with a one-word title: trail, water, hikers, shelter, flora, wildlife, etc., vistas. And then it didn't start out to be a book, but then it started coming together, and I thought that I would perhaps self-publish this. And I even worked it all up to self-publish. But then I remembered I have a good friend who's a very good publisher, George Thompson, who he used to have a place called the Center for American Places, and he publishes high quality, low volume books about place, and he's won a number of awards. So I have gotten George interested in this, and he's fully behind it, but all of his books have to be subsidized because they're full of photographs, and they're expensive, and they're low volume. So right now, we had hoped to get the University of Georgia to subsidize this, but they said they loved it, but they couldn't do it. And right now it's with the University of Virginia, which is probably more fitting anyway. We haven't gotten a read on that yet or not. So I'm hoping in a year or so to come out with a photographic essay entitled simply Virginia's AT, Walking the Appalachian Trail of the Virginias. And so I'll keep you posted. Maybe there'll be a Books and Brews if that ever happens. Oh, the one other thing I wanted to say is George is really into anniversaries, if he can tie a book to an anniversary. And it was in 1921 that Benton McKay promoted the original idea of the Appalachian Trail. And oddly enough, that was in a journal of architecture as a city, sort of a parallel to city planning, but it was sort of wilderness planning to help city dwellers, basically. But that, so 2021 is the 100th anniversary of the idea of the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah, Dave, good luck with as you work through that process. We hope it happens for you sooner rather than later. And I've just restored microphone access for anybody who wants to has questions, comments. Feel free to speak.
I guess I don't need my hat anymore.
Well, Dave, I want to say two things. One, your presentation, as it did last time, I'm glad we got to unpack your backpack so that we could see how much time and preparation it takes. I'm a bit surprised. I've never been on a multi-day hike, but to know how much careful planning and forethought that takes to prepare. but it reminds me of the importance of remaining active and setting goals for yourself after retirement. I think that's a message that will resonate with all of our lifelong learning community. And then the other thing, from what I know about you in many of your classes, and I see it in this presentation too, the things you talk about suggest a deep respect for nature, and you're often talking about our relationship either with the earth or the relationship towards each other. And I heard that when you were talking about the camaraderie found among hikers. So thank you for always keeping that present, for everything you do for our community, and for everything you remind us about the importance of community. I appreciate your time today, and thank everyone who's joining us and sticking with us here a few minutes after our scheduled end time. Anything you want to say, Dave, before we part?
I just appreciate what you're doing. This is an honor. It's a labor of love, and I really appreciate all the people out there, many of whom are also presenters. And thanks for being here today.
Yes, thank you all. And as I said at the beginning, hopefully we'll see you on the trail soon. Have a good day.
All right. Bye, y'all.